So good morning. Good morning, good morning. We have a nice group this morning. So hopefully you pick, wow, that's a lot of voice. That's a lot of rabbi. Hopefully you picked up a copy of the text we'll be looking from. We'll begin with our blessing and then we'll pick up where we left off. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Bless our you, source of life in the universe, who has instructed us and joined us to engage with texts of significance and meaning. Okay, we're going to jump into chapter 28, picking up with Jacob, absconding, if you will, having received his father's blessing in lieu of his brother having received the same. There's only one birthright blessing to be extended, it seems, and Jacob is heading for the hills there to find a wife, but mostly to get away from his brother. But before we pick up that story, are there questions from last time or earlier or that you brought with you this morning that we want to get to before we take up something new? We're okay? Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the story. I want us to do it on at least a couple levels. We'll read the text. We'll get a sense of what's going on. We already have a question or someone who pointed out to us does this say what I think it says? It seems that, and we'll talk about that just on what we call the Peshat level, the surface level. This is a useful text for us. If you remember, I think I introduced this earlier in the year, or maybe it was last year, that Maimonides, who was a 12th century Jewish philosopher, Spanish philosopher, physician, he suggested that when we read a text of Torah, there are four levels on which we might understand that exercise. He used the letters in Hebrew, Pei, Resh, Daled, Samech, P-R-D-S, if you will. Pardes is the Hebrew phrase or the Hebrew word that's made from those letters. It's the same word that we get from paradise. It refers to an orchard. And it's an acronym in that each of those four letters suggests a different depth at which we can read something or understand a text. And it informs the midrashic means of engaging with a piece of Torah. So Peshat is the surface level, the very surface level that when you hear a story, there are nouns and verbs. They mean certain things. It's the simplest understanding. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and what you read is what's going on, and certainly a child reading the story would hear about the characters and the actions, but is just taking it at the surface level. The next is remez, the R, P-R. Remez means hint. There's something going on here. There's a talking snake. There's a ladder that reaches between heaven and earth. There's, something in the text that's suggestive of something else going on. You're alone in the field and all of a sudden someone shows up out of seemingly nowhere. That's a suggestion that there's something more going on than just the surface level. The third level, D, P-R-D, drash, is where we get the word midrash, which means to plumb for meaning or to draw meaning out from something. There's something more than a hint there. There's really a suggestion that perhaps this word is connected to that word, or the way in which this is phrased, or it may just fire up something in your imagination, and so you're going to fill in the blanks about why they spoke to themselves, why they spoke to each other this way, or why it's introduced in this fashion. So, for instance, I suggested to you last time that as we read the description of the ladder that stretches between heaven and earth, the angels that are moving along that ladder are described as ascending and descending, which is a bit counterintuitive if we imagine where angels would begin. They might begin in heaven, we should think, and will come down the ladder and then return going up. They might be descending and ascending. So if it suggests ascending and descending, well, that's an opportunity for a midrash about who are really angels or where they are, that kind of thing. And then the final sod is the Hebrew word for secret. And I one time heard Stephen Jay Gould, a late professor of anthropology and zoology at Harvard, introduced at a lecture as the eminently arrogant Stephen Jay Gould. And then he took the stage and gave profound lecture, but the eminently arrogant. That would have applied to Maimonides also, who at some level believed that he was able to understand or discern meanings that simply weren't available to the rest of us. And so this sod idea, this idea that there's a secret meaning that perhaps every once in a while we get a glimpse of, or perhaps you gain an insight into, or you have truly a eureka aha moment and new idea came to you that you can't connect to anything else. But there's an appreciation in the Midrashic understanding that for all the surface meaning and all the things that it might hint to, and all the imaginative ideas that we might draw out of the text and create through this act of midrash, a literature we call midrash, there's also a level beneath which we simply can't access. The text works on a multiplicity of levels, but there's a level at which, as human beings, we simply can't get to. Does that make sense? It's in that spirit, and we don't have to be precise about where we are along that plumb line, but there's an appreciation that that's the level at which we're invited to engage with these texts. We can stay at the surface level and just understand the nouns and verbs, and do I understand this correctly, that when Jacob is sent to find a wife from his mother's brother's home, well, then he's going after a first cousin, and that's correct according to Bashat level. But we might want to go deeper than that at any given place. Okay? With that understanding, we'll begin. Okay?
By the way, my whole sermon today is basically taking this approach. If you've heard it already at 8 or 9, that it jumps into each of these different levels in and out of them. It'll make more sense if you think of it that way.
Excellent. Okay, great. Okay. Let's just begin. Then Isaac, right, the father, called Jacob his second-born son, who has now received the birthright and is not yet, birthright blessing, and is not yet married, unlike his older twin. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, "You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women, the girls from around here. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as a wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother," which is to say, go choose a wife from among your cousins. "May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and numerous, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give to you the blessing of Abraham, to you and to your offspring with you, so that you may take possession of the land where you now live as an alien, land that God gave to Abraham." And so it is that it's being given to Jacob to understand that that which was promised to Abraham and that which flows through Isaac is now Jacob's to inherit, right? It's sort of all that you see before you one day will be yours. That's the idea. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban's son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. He goes to his uncle's house. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he charged him, "You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women." That is to say, as your brother did. Right? "You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women as your brother did," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother. Interesting. That's an opportunity for a midrash. It only suggests that Isaac gave Jacob instructions, and yet Esau understands that both Jacob and Rebekah told him what to do, or that he obeyed both his parents in his father's instructions. Right? You remember when Jacob was receiving or was being coached by Rebekah how to go about receiving the blessing from Isaac. That is to say, I'll prepare the food that he expects Esau to prepare for him, the food that he loves. You wrap yourself in these animal skins, or you cover yourself with your brother's animal scent, or from the outdoors or the smoky woods, or whatever it is. Rebekah coaches him in this way, and then he goes to Isaac, and we have a tete-a-tete between Isaac and Jacob, wherein Isaac, seemingly convinced that the son who stands before him is in fact Esau, provides to Jacob the blessing that by rights should have gone to Esau. But perhaps this is an opportunity, this particular verse, where Jacob follows the instructions of his mother and his father, in spite of the fact that only his father is mentioned, might give us an opportunity to suggest that Jacob and Rebekah were in this together from the beginning. Perhaps, right? Okay. And that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please his father Isaac, Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalat, daughter of Abraham's son Ishmael and sister of Nebaioth, something like that, to be his wife in addition to the wives he had. And we had the question last time, Dana, about did he not marry into the family as Jacob was instructed to do, that is Esau? But we mentioned that Esau, he does, but he marries into Ishmael's family. And remember that Ishmael and Hagar were the ones who were sent away, and they're the ones about whom we don't speak, or they're the former family, or the wife that we don't talk about anymore, that idea, right? Okay. Any questions so far? Just sort of about the facts that sort of set the stage for the drama about which.
Why is it so important to find a wife to get married for both of them, particularly Jacob the younger? To propagate the race, to have children, yes, you could say that about anybody, but why specifically Jacob? Why specifically Jacob? And is it so important to keep the bloodlines pure, not those Canaanite women? It starts to make sense. This isn't just, we don't like those families, we don't like those people. There's a higher piece, and it's more hint, it's moving into suggestion, if you think of it at that level. Why does Jacob need to be married to the right people?
To spread the nations.
Part of it, to fulfill the promises that God has made. And that shouldn't be done through Ishmael's line. That was already decided. That's the Muslim world, that's not us. We are this line, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so you need to have the appropriate wife, or wives in this case, for that to continue. Because all these promises from God are dependent on having children, are they not? Spreading the nation, spreading the faith, inhabiting the land, being a blessing to others. You have to have kids. So this is a crucial moment in the story, and you need to get this right, because your brother has messed it up twice now.
Fair enough. Okay.
Tom?
Didn't first, not just minor, but didn't Esau already know that his parents didn't care for his wives?
Yeah.
Great question.
Did Esau not already know his parents didn't care for his wives?
That's what they told him.
So then, if that's the case, Tom, right, then why verse 8 at the top of the back of the page, right? It seems from these verses, 7 and 8, perhaps, the bottom and the top of the back of the page, that Esau comes to appreciate or understand, now that Jacob's been given an instruction to not marry among the Canaanites, that his earlier marriage must have displeased his parents. But surely he would have known that, right? So then let's write the Midrash. How do we square that circle? That's how the Midrash begins, right? A professor who said, remember I said Drash is the third level, and Midrash is the act of engaging in that search or that explication or that plumbing for meaning, and it creates Midrash, which itself is the name of the literature, a single Midrash. The body of literature is called Midrash. More than one is Midrashim. But the Midrash asks, Darshani. The verse calls out, explicate me, make sense of me. Why do we need verse 8? Let's just have some fun.
So
why do we need verse 8?
Give us an answer, as Aaron is often saying, fan fiction. How did Esau find out his parents didn't like his new Canaanite wives? What would have happened?
We learned earlier that Esau married Canaanite women. Maybe
That's
so.
Probably.
So we have a suggestion that he married the women that he married as a rebellion against his parents. I don't know, it didn't work. They still like him.
How many teenagers have done stupid stuff to rebel against their parents? I got a tattoo I showed you. That's on your body, not mine. I pierced my ears. I dated this guy, this girl. Have any of you experienced that before? Yes. Anybody who's alive has done it or been the recipient of it. And with Esau, but it doesn't mean he hates his parents forever. It doesn't mean he still doesn't want their appreciation, their approval. I mean, he's still the kid. That's how it works. Pay attention to me. well, if my brother did this, maybe I can pick a better, apparently he gets multiple do-overs. So he can have multiple wives and eventually maybe address the problem. This one is the second, I guess it'd be the third wife. In my experience, one is plenty, I'll say that, enough to keep track of. So he's got these two local girls, the Canaanite women, and then the third is from Ishmael's line. So is that better than the two local? So that the category is not as bad, probably in there.
But we could go from the other side and say, so what was it about Rebekah and Isaac prior to this verse that gave Esau no reason to doubt his parents were accepting? Right? Go ahead, please.
I read it as, maybe he knew that his mom didn't like that, but he didn't know that his father didn't like that.
Awesome.
Repeat that.
Maybe Esau knew that his mother didn't like his wives, but wasn't aware that his father felt similarly. Okay.
What would a mother do to show displeasure at your girlfriend you brought home or wife?
Right.
Not talk to her. Excellent. What else? What would not you do, but your mean sister? Let me ask it that way. What would be a normal reaction to show that you don't like that girl you brought home, or boy, whatever the case may be?
Ignore her.
Ignore her. What else?
After she's out of the room, probably tell him bluntly.
Complain about her. Nag her. Yeah, not say, just...
Withhold any praise or compliments, right? Right? Less is more, right? Yeah.
Or you fawn over the other one and kind of just are polite but distant to that. There are a lot of ways, without words, to convey, I don't really like this one at all.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think it's interesting that Esau was more concerned about his father's attitude than his mother.
So the-
All through the story, we see the bond between Jacob and Esau. So it makes sense that he would be more worried about his dad's reaction.
Great point.
Esau is more connected or were concerned about his father's reaction than he was about his mother's reaction, whereas Jacob, in contrast, is aligned or allied more with Rebekah than he was with Isaac. Right? So each of these is a different facet of this prism into this family and its dynamics. Right? We have rivalries between the sons, we have favorites between the parents, we have different kinds of information that's been conveyed or at least has been heard, right? We can say things to people all day long. It doesn't mean that they necessarily heard us. There's a phrase in the Talmud which says, Hashomea tamid sodek. It means the listener is always right. That is to say, I had a mentor who said it this way. The meaning of your communication is in how it's received, which is a lie, but we must behave as if it's the truth. Which is to say, you say something, you're certain of what you've said to this other party. How they hear it is actually what's meaningful and germane, right? They take that understanding and do what they will with it. The listener is always right. How what you communicate is heard is its actual meaning, which is a lie, but we have to behave as if it's the truth. If Esau never gleaned from his parents, either one or the other, their displeasure, in spite of the fact they thought they were being manifestly clear. We don't invite her to Thanksgiving. We don't visit your home. We won't spend time with you when she's there. But Esau never picks up on it. Well, it's not until his brother's given a different charge, which is go find a spouse, go find your wife from a different community, from our original community. Doesn't need to be said now. Unlike your foolish brother who married the first girl that batted her eyes at him. Right? I mean, Okay, so what we're doing here is engaging in this midrashic exercise, which is saying, what's going on here? What does this echo from before? Or what does this come to resolve? Or why is this now seemingly in conflict? We were all pretty clear that Esau had married the wrong girls, given his parents' reaction. Esau doesn't clue in until he sees his brother follow his parents' instructions, or his father's instruction. He reads it to be his father and his mother's instructions. Okay? Yes? Please, no. Because Esau seems to repeatedly make mistakes or bad decisions, is he aware when he marries into Ishmael's family that Ishmael's family is the black sheep? I don't know. What do you imagine? That he was unaware. That's the black sheep. Fair enough. Maybe he wasn't aware. Maybe the family kept it under wraps. They weren't ugly with regard to how they spoke of the other family, about whom they don't speak. But Esau didn't pick up on it, right? Maybe, I have two thoughts. One was later in Exodus, when it's described that God hardens Pharaoh's heart with regard to releasing the Hebrew slaves. And then we spoke about whether having hardened Pharaoh's heart, whether God can then hold Pharaoh responsible for it. One of the glosses on that verse is the verb to harden is also the verb that can be understood to honor. Sort of there's a weightiness to it, if you will. And you might then understand the verse not to say that God repeatedly hardens Pharaoh's heart, but Pharaoh having made a decision, God honors it or respects it or allows it to proceed. And we know that when we decide one thing, it becomes easy to continue making decisions in that direction. The other thought I had, I think it was Abba Eban, the Israeli foreign minister from the 60s, I think, who described, said of the Palestinians that they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Maybe Esau never misses an opportunity to make the wrong choice. And that just is redoubling that. And so if you misunderstood or failed to appreciate that, this is Esau. Esau always picks the wrong thing. Given two choices, he makes the wrong one. Again and again and again. Even when he has the best of intentions. He wants to please his parents by marrying the right girl, and he marries into the wrong side of the family. Right? Maybe so. All right? Other thoughts so far? Please.
Could he be doubling down? Like, well, if you're so displeased with me anyway, then I'm going to do something worse.
I love it. Is the question, could he just be doubling down? Having married outside the community, he's now going to marry inside the family the way mom and dad wanted, but in Hebrew we say dafka, precisely. He does it in such a way that you did what I asked. I'm just not going to give you what you want. Right? Great. Okay? And if we were going to write the background profile for Jacob or Esau or Isaac or Rebekah, or for that matter, the wives that marry into the family, you've got some material to work with. Okay? All right. Verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. Haran is where Abraham was originally from, right? His grandfather's old neighborhood. Jacob came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. I mentioned that in Hebrew, the word place is makom. It actually shows up, I think it was 3 times we already read that word in this particular set of verses, and it's one of the names that rabbinic traditions understood to be a reference to God. Right? So we could begin to put together some story about what it means to come to that place, or come to where God is, or be right where you are and realize that God, we're going to come to this a little bit later, is there just the same. Right? You could say it from the other side, there's no place where God is not. Right? Or the rabbis talk about, is God everywhere? The answer is, it's not that God is everywhere, but God is anywhere. Play with that. That's sort of interesting, right? Anywhere what? Finish it. Anywhere you recognize that God is there? Anywhere God wants to be? The place you might least expect? Right? A place that's different in contradistinction in the church, in the I don't know, in the sunset, in the moment you're in, whatever, right? We could figure that out. We could play with that. Not to solve it, but just to have some fun with it. He came to a certain place, he lays down for the night, puts a rock under his head, and he dreams. Always an invitation for interpretation. We certainly know that post-Freud. He dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on it. An incredibly famous or well-known biblical image, right? What does it make you think of? Jonathan brought in the picture of the ziggurat last time, sort of this pyramidal structure that goes up by elevations, the idea being that at the highest point there you're going to find best access to the divine. That's what it represents. What's this dream begin to suggest? What's it make you think of? Connection with God. Okay, because, or say more, Jim?
Because it's a physical thing. You can see or think you see.
Okay, so now we have the ladder, and what's happening at the base of the ladder? Verse 13. And the Lord stood beside him. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting, right? Seemingly at the base of the ladder. Having constructed the ladder, or dreamt of the ladder, which is connecting earth to heaven, now then, where's God? Not at the top of the ziggurat or the top of the ladder, but right there beside Jacob next to the stone on the ground while he's dreaming. That's a different juxtaposition, right? Does someone jump in, or should we keep going? Okay, we'll keep going. The Lord stood beside him and said, "How are you?" "I'm the Lord." Good to meet you. "I'm the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac." Interesting juxtaposition. Or maybe it says, "the God of Abraham, your father, and God of your father Isaac." Right? We could play with the syntax there. "The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. And your offspring shall be," know that I'm, verse 15, "know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you."
Take that as the opposite of what you just said.
Okay, tell us, how is it the opposite?
God has done all these things, it implies that he's going to leave.
Say it again. Give us some verses here.
I shall not leave you until, I will not leave you until I've done what I promised you.
Yes, verse 15. And so,
Reading that the opposite way, that the Lord will leave you after he's done those things.
it does seem that way, right? Having completed these tasks, I will leave you. And that's in contrast with, or in tension with, know that I'm with you and keep you wherever you go. Will I always be with you? Or having completed this task, you'll be good. You're on your way. I don't know.
How is this promise in the dream similar to, different than the promise or the birthright or the blessing that he would have received did receive before?
What was in the birthright blessing? Do you recall? What was it that Isaac conveyed or gave to Jacob in the course of that blessing? What did that blessing promise? How does this differ? Do you recall? Essentially, yes?
Yeah, this one is more specific to Jacob. So it's already the same blessing that Isaac gave him, but then God adds, because he is terrified, obviously, Jacob in this unknown land. So he's saying, I'm with you. So like my presence is with you. So it's just like kind of that. But then action, I'll keep protect you. That's specific because he needs that.
So the blessing here, or God's, is essentially the same as before, but even more so. Okay, so it's even more emphatic or more personalized to Jacob in this case. God's restatement of the blessing, essentially. How about this? Having dreamt of this ladder which captured our attention and our imagination, the real action here is actually this conversation between God and Jacob, which seemingly is not connected to the ladder. It doesn't take place while he's on a rung of the ladder. It certainly doesn't take place at the top of the ladder. So now we have an invitation to imagine, so what role does the ladder play? What does it suggest the significance of the ladder is in the dream if it's not necessarily connected to the conversation or to the blessing that God and Jacob exchanged? Yes?
But God is there with him. I mean, he's not up there or on the ladder at all. He's there. And I would think that would give Jacob more assurance that he's not alone.
Excellent. So it's suggested that rather than imagining God is atop the ladder, it turns out that God is right there with Jacob.
Because Jacob couldn't go up the ladder to see God, so God came down to us.
Okay. Jacob couldn't go up the ladder, but God could come down.
That, by the way, is the basic idea behind the incarnation. God becomes a human, becomes to us, because we can't go up to God, so God comes to us to take us to God.
That's
So,
amazing.
Diana?
All right, we're going to get a couple of... We'll come right around.
The ladder is more kind of a tether between earth and heaven, that it's not just some place that's floating out in the outer space, but it is something that is still connected to earth, and so God is still connected to us, and he is showing his support, that he's not just blessing Jacob, but he's also showing that he's going to remain supportive through this tether between heaven and earth.
Great. So the word that was suggested was that it's a tether, the ladder to heaven, between heaven and earth, that it connects the two, right? Or we'll leave it there. That it tethers it. There's a safety in that. Yes, coming around. Yes, please.
And the angels would be a suggestion of communication that's going constantly back and forth.
Excellent. So the ladder is a signifier that there's communication going back and forth between these two realms. Lovely. I'll get you. I promise I'll get you.
Well, back in, if I recall, chapter 6, 7, somewhere around there, the descendants of Adam have already learned this lesson the hard way. They tried to build their own tower to heaven.
Oh, the Tower of Babel. Yes?
God said, it doesn't work that way, in effect.
Nice. So this is not the first time we have a physical representation of that which connects heaven and earth. We have in the story of the Tower of Babel an effort to build that which would connect earth to heaven. And essentially the takeaway from that story is that's not acceptable. That's not what God wants. Okay? Yes?
The ladder suggests to me, even though there's the idea of God helping people in this life and engaging with human life, that there is something beyond, that there is something like that. If there isn't, then the ladder is meaningless.
Love it.
The angels have to be coming from somewhere. So it's not just about today and what happens tomorrow in this life. There's something more. That's what I get.
Excellent. If I can't paraphrase, I'll get you, Jeff. I'll come around. I'll get it, everybody. It's suggestive that while the action, this is my paraphrase, while the action takes place, if you will, on the ground, at the base of the ladder itself is suggestive that there is a connection between what goes on here, that which we can experience and apprehend, and to the extent that we're able to even understand, although that's sometimes elusive, but there's a connection between what goes on here and the higher realm. Yes? Okay, a few I haven't heard from yet. Yes?
This all seems to be about real estate.
Real estate. Location, location, location.
Location. And the base of the ladder, the real estate is the base of the ladder. That's what holds the ladder in place.
Excellent.
And so without that, you wouldn't be able to climb the ladder because you couldn't reach it, you couldn't get to it.
There's something about the real estate, where the ladder is placed, that allows it to exist or that
It gives it support.
it gives it support. in the rabbinic tradition, in the midrashic tradition, the rabbis want to connect each of the places where God shows up as having a portal, if you will, right, between heaven, or between earth and heaven, whether it's through being at the top of a mountain, or whether it's the ladder, or whether it's the Temple Mount, or whether it's in the Old Testament where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, or whether it's where Jesus was crucified, or whether it's where Muhammad ascends to heaven. There's a sense that these places hold power, and insofar as God shows up in these different places, they must somehow be connected with each other, or this is really sort of science fiction, right? But if you remember the story of the Star Wars, it took place in a galaxy a long, long time ago, right? So we shouldn't think that we're at the top of development in terms of what's available. That these places are somehow connected all to each other. That kind of holy real estate.
The sermon today, I talk about this idea of the towns of Gilgal, Bethel, and Jericho, and later the Jordan River, as significant points in the people's history. So there's, at one level, they're connected divinely. Something holy happened here. At another, more human level, they're connected because this was an experience I had in this place. I've talked about it before, where Natalie and I met happens to be at some place that no longer exists. But to me, it is really holy because that's where my life changed at that point. And this spot was called what before Jacob went there?
Padan Aram, no?
It was just like out in the field somewhere near this other place. But after that, he called it what? Bethel, which means house of God. So an insignificant patch of dirt, it's stony area, it's desert like there, an insignificant patch of dirt, when he falls asleep and the rock that was his pillow, that becomes an altar because of what happened there. The ladder or the ramp or the stairway to heaven makes that experience, makes that place holy where it wasn't necessarily before. So that operates at a divine theological level, God's presence there, and it operates at the human level of our experience there. And so these two with that ladder symbolize those two events, the human and the divine meeting in that spot.
I like that. Yeah.
So the image of a stair or a ladder and angels ascending and descending, to me also, and just think about people going up and down stairs, there's communication going both ways, an opportunity for confusion, right? And so where does confusion enter into this? And then when Jacob wakes up, because the Lord is in the face, came down and he said, oh, now I know how awesome is this place. So is there the opportunity to talk about like how we're interpreting things and where Jacob was and confusion because of communication channels going both ways?
Yes.
Great question.
Yes.
I have a question about the Hebrew word where it says ladder set up on the earth. And we think, ladder like Andrew used this in the earth meaning the planet earth. But does the word earth mean, the Hebrew word, does it mean the planet earth or just soil on the ground?
It refers to soil or land.
And the word for ladder is a word that can mean either ladder or stairs in Hebrew?
You could translate it that way. You could.
Because after the last class, I went home and looked it up in the ball game. The Latin is scholar, which in Italian is still the same word, scholar, which means either stairs or ladder. But so if this just means earth and doesn't mean the planet earth, we were asking about why the angels are going up and why God stand beside him. Maybe in his dream he's not on the planet earth, he's dreaming he's in heaven, and God is standing next to him in heaven, and the ladder's going up.
Excellent. Okay, so let me restate that. The first question was, does the word in Hebrew for ladder, as translated into English, ladder here, the Hebrew word happens to be sulam, that's not important for our purposes, could that be understood or translated as stairs? And of course, translations are themselves subjective at some level. A professor in rabbinical school who suggested that the very best thing a translator could do for herself would be to destroy the original. Because ultimately it's interpretation, right? I mean, there are words that translate one-to-one, but what it's suggestive of, if you see a staircase as opposed to a ladder, because the idea is ascending and descending doesn't mean a ladder. Typically, we imagine only one person travels along a ladder at a time, or you certainly leave enough space between people traveling on a ladder in the same direction. But you don't really make room for someone to come back down as you're going up. You invite them to wait till you've completed your travel along the ladder, and then it's their turn. But a staircase offers a different image. So great, let's use the staircase and not imagine that ascending and descending are separate activities, but it's the way in which a road works, or a staircase or a hallway works, right? And then the next question was whether or not the reference to earth and heaven, whether earth references the planet Earth, which I suppose could suggest that anywhere hereon would work, or is it the earth on which the feet of the ladder, the base of the ladder, are rooted or are grounded? It refers to the land, whether that you want to understand that to be soil or this hectare of property. It's this particular place, such that the place is entitled to a new name afterwards, right? But all of these questions I don't want to resolve them so tightly or so formulaically as if there's one understanding. If it's suggestive to you of what's going on here, the economy of language that's used gives you an opportunity to fill in the adjectives or fill in the backstory, or to work with the story. And we're going to see something about that in a verse or two. Yes.
I just had a thought that as the Tower of Babel didn't work, that was a physical thing.
The Tower of Babel seems to have been a physical tower, and it didn't work.
It's a ladder in a dream.
Yes?
That is for everybody to dream whatever they want to do.
It was a ladder in a dream, and therefore we shouldn't be limited by its physicality or its physical descriptions. It was a dreamscape.
The other question, how did Jacob interpret this dream? Well, that was a weird dream. I better write it down. What did he make of it?
He decided. Go ahead.
This happened is essentially how it seems to me he took it. This is a message from God, which our culture is less open to than just about every culture before us. He took this as, I now have a different relationship with this place. I have a connection to God in a way that I hadn't quite imagined before because of this dream. Is that his subconscious speaking? Maybe. But that's what he believed. And why, what do you often say? Believing and do?
Oh, what you believe is interesting?
Yeah.
That what you believe is interesting. I'm interested in what you believe. But what your beliefs lead you to do, that's significant.
So we can believe whatever we want, but what did Jacob do after this dream? That to me is more significant, Matt, because he responded in a particular way. Jim? He anoints the rock. He pours oil on it, which symbolizes what?
Sacred.
It's sacred. Something holy happened here, anointed it. And I said this before, in Hebrew the word is Messiah, in Greek it's Christos, which means the anointed one. So it's to make holy. So he anointed the rock as a symbol of, I experienced something holy happening here. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the household of God. So he's ritual. We do this all the time. We ritually make symbolic some event that happened with the thing. In the sermon today, the mantle, the cape or cloak of Elijah becomes like Superman's cape or Harry Potter's cape. It's a holy invested thing. I will give this to you as a symbol of passing on that authority. As pouring oil on the rock is a symbol to himself that this is a holy spot. And the name becomes House of God at that point.
But wait. Yeah, Charles, you want to do something quick?
I would say that once he anoints the rock, it becomes the base of the ladder. It's almost the first rung.
Well, that's a good point. Once he anoints the rock, Charles said, it almost like becomes the first step or the base of the ladder. So this is the spot where I connected with God in this new way.
So if we will, I'm going to take you to verses 15 and 16. If we could take from Charles' comment, The first step, pun intended, if you will, is to be, if you will, aware of where you are. Right? Just awareness. Now watch this. In verse 16, verse 16. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep. He comes out of his dream and says, this is a phenomenal verse, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. I'm going to finish the next verse. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Now watch this. In verse 16, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. In the Hebrew, we have a language wherein verbs contain either prefixes or suffixes beyond the present tense. In the past tense and in the future tense, we have verbs that have either with prefix or suffix the subject contained therein. Does that make sense? So that when you read a verb in the past or future tense, we know whether the actor is a single individual, whether the actor is male or female, based on what the prefix or the suffix is. Does that make sense? Okay. With that in mind, this verse in Hebrew has a redundancy. It also contains the pronoun that is not required. So instead of our reading it on its surface, or rather maybe on its depth meaning of combining or ignoring the pronoun and simply reading, I did not know, we can understand it also to suggest God was in this place and I did not know. Or if you will, God was in this place and God was in me and I did not know. God was in this place and I didn't know. Now then, the place gets renamed Bethel, or takes on for the first time a name that describes its significance. But in the rabbinic tradition, in the midrashic tradition reading this, there's something about Jacob also. First of all, the dream took place in his own head. Right? Yes, it was on this rock. His head was on the rock, and yes, the rock is on this ground upon which next door, right, adjacent is this ladder. But it's also happening within Jacob, the text seems to suggest. And then when we read the following verse, he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? Could be how awesome is this God, because we have this word makom for place, which means also God. This is none other than the house of God, Bethel, and the gate of heaven. So one sermon might be to describe each of those places or reference, I suppose, as somehow significantly different. God was in this place, it's none other than the house of God, and it's also the gate of heaven. Now we begin to have a conversation. In this book, God was in this place and I did not know, by Rabbi Larry Kushner. He takes us through about 10 different Hasidic rabbinic teachers who are glossing on this verse and bringing a different understanding of what the verse suggests. So one suggests awareness, simply being open to the possibility that in the place you least expect, or when you least expect, you don't know what you're going to dream tonight, or what new insights as a result you're going to come up with, or that are going to be given to you. There's an idea about selflessness, that only happens when you remove yourself from the story, or about ego, or about all these different glosses that you and I might come up with if we were to say, what are the conditions necessary to have an experience like Jacob did? What are the qualities of God such that that's even available and we don't know where or when? These are the kinds of questions that this story are suggestive of. Not that he happened to be at the magic point on the earth where the longitudes and latitudes line up such that, remember about 4 points where the 4 states in the West, there's some magical stuff, or there's certain places where crystals work better than others. Okay, maybe you just have to get lucky and choose the daily double, right? And you land on that spot and you get bigger payouts. And maybe it's available anywhere. Not everywhere, but anywhere. All right.
But there's a limit.
Is there? There's a limit.
One limit. Whether God is in Jacob or right next to him at the bottom of the ladder is until I have done what I have promised you.
Until I've done it, I promise you, I'll be with you until that moment. So how do we square that? Maybe we're never fulfilled. Maybe it's never completed. Maybe the promise is never actually in toto complete. In which case, okay, God will always be with you, right? Much like your life's work. When does it end? Yes.
We're running out of time, and I want to ask a question. We haven't gotten there yet. But we are taught to love God unconditionally, period. Just like a puppy loves us. The next paragraph, he sets a whole bunch of conditions for God to meet before he will be God.
Yeah, he
That
comes
bothers
out
me.
more favorably in the deal, I think.
Sorry?
I think Jacob, he's basically bargaining with God
Yeah.
and setting very favorable terms for himself. If you give me all this stuff, if you do everything you say, basically I'll be your guy and I'll give you 20%, 10% of everything I get. It's tacky.
Tacky. Okay. Yes.
It is tacky, yes.
So this comes up, actually, it's come up in other places too. It strikes me just how individual and specific God's relationship is with the patriarch. And it confuses me kind of nuts that it seems like God's relationship is just with Abraham or just with Isaac. I was struck by the fact that Jacob referred to God talking to Isaac as your God, not our God. And where I would have thought maybe the whole family should be involved in this or something, it seems like at least this early on, that doesn't happen. Later on, we'll have Rachel married to a patriarch, breeding idols, which she stolen from her father's house, which doesn't really seem like she's quite got the same relationship with God as Jacob does. So, are there any comments on the tradition about what it means that God's relationship for a while is just with one specific person, so that
Yes.
the person feel like, okay, Abraham, your God wants me sacrificed or something.
Right.
My God.
Okay. So the question is, it seems that God's relationship with each of these patriarchs or matriarch, each of the characters are individual to that person. And that there may not be a unifying field theory with regard to what these relationships are, but they're unique and particular to each person. And that seems to suggest that not only does each person have their own understanding or relationship with God, but in one case you're citing that later when Rachel is going to bring in, is it Rachel? Is going to bring into the house idols from her own experience of God, and they sort of just get assimilated into the story, right? And what do we do with the fact that we have a presentation of God, this protagonist in the story, who seems to have a unique relationship with each individual, right? Let me get you afterwards with regard to how I teach this with regard to certain prayers, okay? But we can play with that. Is God different, or are we just each experiencing one God in our own particular way? I don't know. I don't want to solve it too quickly, but that's an interesting insight. Yes, Charles?
In tribute to all of this, there are today, I would imagine, tens of thousands of synagogues around the world named Bethel.
Right. Many synagogues are named Bethel. Naming synagogues is sort of like naming Chinese restaurants. If you were going to open a Chinese restaurant, you could pick from, I don't know, a dozen or 24 words: Happy Garden, Dragon Family, Wall, Szechuan Mandarin, Peking, right? And you just sort of recombine. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, but that's how Jewish synagogues are named too. You got Beth, Torah, Israel, Shalom, right? Tree, I suppose, in this neighborhood, right? And you just combine these different words. So people think it's a big coincidence that I, in Philadelphia, was the associate rabbi at Road of Shalom, and then I came to work at a Road of Shalom. What a coincidence. Right. Not so much. Not so much. Okay, yes. Yep.
I just wanted to say that I feel that the latter goes back to what they say in Paul, and that's what I thought, that God made me physical, the physical way of being my Jacob, that may he will leave when the promise is fulfilled. But the latter represents that there is this long
I like that.
relation.
Oh, it suggested that to square the circle where God says, I'll be with you until I finish what I've promised. It may be that at some point God will depart, but the ladder itself will remain. Or the ladder is suggested that there's always a means by which we can remain in connection with. That's a lovely idea. That's a lovely idea. It also, I was thinking also, just establishing the ladder, or recognizing that a connection exists, or that there's this tether that's unbroken. You may not use it for a long time. You may not call home for many years. You may not be in relationship with, but it still exists, right? I love you even though you can't see it. Or I know on the other end of the line when I'm ready, God is there. Or family will pick up. Or, right? These are wonderful ideas. Okay. Thanks, everyone.